In a class of its own, it stands alone. Chevrolet for 1964. No other automobile offers so much of what so many people desire.
The 1970s and 1980s were decades of change for American car culture. The muscle car era was fading. The oil crisis of 1973 hit hard. Gas prices soared and buyers began demanding smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles. At the same time, safety regulations and emissions laws reshaped the automotive landscape. American manufacturers like Ford, Chevrolet, and Oldsmobile still dominated, but Japanese imports, Toyota and Honda, began to challenge Detroit with reliability and efficiency. For the first time, the best-selling cars weren't always about horsepower. They were about practicality. Yet even in this age of change, certain models stood out and became icons, not just because of sales, but because they reflected the spirit of their time. These are the top 5 best-selling cars in the U.S. during the 1970s and 1980s. There's one car that dominated American sales in the 1970s and 80s. It was the Oldsmobile Cutlass. For several years, it was the #1 selling car in the U.S., a title that surprised even Oldsmobile. Launched in the early 60s as a compact, the Cutlass grew larger by the 70s, eventually becoming a mid-size family favorite. By 1976, the Cutlass Supreme became the top-selling car in America, and it stayed near the top well into the 80s. Why was it so popular? It was the perfect middle ground, affordable, stylish, reliable, and available in multiple trims, coupes, sedans, and wagons. For many families, the Cutlass was a practical choice, but with just enough flair to feel special. Fun fact, in 1977, Oldsmobile sold over 600,000 Cutlasses in a single year, an incredible number for one model line. Today, the Cutlass is often forgotten, since Oldsmobile itself was discontinued in 2004. But for nearly 2 decades, it was the car you were most likely to see in American driveways.
The Chevrolet Impala was a giant of the American road. By the 1970s, it had already become one of the most recognizable cars in the country. The Impala offered space, comfort, and affordability. Families loved its roomy interiors, while police departments used it as a reliable fleet car. By 1973, despite the oil crisis, the Impala continued to sell in the hundreds of thousands, and it stayed among America's top sellers through the early 80s. The Impala symbolized the last era of the big American sedan. Large, powerful, and built for comfort. While downsized in the late 70s to meet fuel standards, it remained a favorite for drivers who wanted space without luxury prices. Fun fact, the Impala has sold over 14 million units since its launch in 1958, making it one of the most popular cars in U.S. history. In the 1970s, the Ford LTD became the full-size car of choice for American families. Positioned above the Ford Galaxy, the LTD offered comfort, smooth driving, and a luxury feel at a mid-range price. By the mid-70s, the LTD was one of the best-selling cars in America, with annual sales in the hundreds of thousands. Its popularity was boosted by its reputation as a reliable family sedan, and its design, big squared-off lines, fit the era's taste. The oil crisis eventually forced Ford to downsize the LTD, but it continued to sell well into the 80s. It represented a transition from the massive cruisers of the 60s to more efficient family cars. Fun fact, the Ford LTD was also widely used by police departments and taxi services, proving its durability beyond suburban driveways. When the 80s arrived, smaller cars began to dominate the market, and Ford's answer was the Escort. Launched in 1981, the Escort quickly became the best-selling car in America for much of the decade. Compact, affordable, and fuel-efficient, the Escort was exactly what buyers wanted after the fuel scares of the 70s. It appealed to young drivers, small families, and anyone looking for reliability on a budget. Fun fact, the Ford Escort was marketed globally. Its European cousin shared the same name, but had different styling and engines. In the U.S., the Escort station wagon version became a favorite of suburban families. By the 1980s, competition from imports was fierce.
and Chevrolet needed a small, affordable car. Enter the Cavalier, introduced in 1982. The Cavalier was Chevrolet's best-selling model of the decade, offering multiple body styles: sedan, coupe, hatchback, convertible, and wagon. It was versatile, cheap to run, and gave Americans a domestic alternative to Toyota and Honda. Fun fact, in 1984, the Cavalier became the best-selling car in the United States, outselling even Ford's Escort. For many Americans, the Cavalier was their very first new car. The Cavalier wasn't flashy, but it reflected the priorities of the 80s: practicality, efficiency, and affordability. The 1970s and 80s transformed America's car market. Gone were the days when muscle cars ruled every street. Instead, fuel efficiency, affordability, and practicality shaped the best sellers. From the stylish Oldsmobile Cutlass to the compact Ford Escort, these cars defined what Americans needed in uncertain times. They might not have the horsepower of the 60s legends, but they sold in record numbers and became part of everyday American life. Looking back, these best sellers remind us that cars aren't just about speed or luxury. They reflect the priorities of an era. And in the 70s and 80s, those priorities were practicality, affordability, and reliability. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.